January 25th, 2022 meeting of the SELCO Commission is called to order at 7:30 a.m. As a preliminary matter, this is Mike Ruffolo, Vice Chairman. Please permit me to confirm that all members and persons anticipated on the agenda are present and can hear me. Members, when I call your name, please respond in the affirmative. Anthony Trippi?
Yes, here.
Maria Lemieux?
Yes.
Matt Beaton?
Yes.
And myself, Mike Ruffolo. Bob Holland is on vacation. Staff, when I call your name, please respond in the affirmative. Chris Roy, SELCO General Manager.
Yes.
Kathy Riba, Administrative Assistant.
Yes.
Ralph Yacarino, Director of Engineering and Electric Operations.
Here.
Joel Malavar, Director of Broadband Technologies.
Here.
Jackie Pratt, Director of Integrated Resources and Communications.
Here.
Greg Honorato, Director of Information Technology. James Zacco, Director of Finance Administration.
Here.
Jonathan Malavar, Senior Engineer.
Here.
Scott Stark, Line Supervisor.
Here.
Patrick Collins, Integrated Resources Coordinator. Here. Tracy Schultz, Human Resources Coordinator.
Here.
Megadeep Sarapalli, Field Engineer.
Here.
Aaron Lecuyer, Broadband Technical Systems and Support Manager. Bill Yovan, Head End Supervisor.
Here.
Stacy Soter, Accounting Coordinator. Okay. Good morning. This open meeting of the SELCO Commission is being conducted remotely, consistent with Senate Bill 2475, signed into law by Governor Baker on June 16, 2021, suspending certain provisions of the Open Meeting Law, GL Chapter 30, Cap A, Section 18. This meeting of the SELCO Commission will be conducted via remote participation to the greatest extent possible. The order allows public bodies to meet entirely remotely, so long as reasonable public access is afforded so that the public can follow along with the deliberations of the meeting. For this meeting, the SELCO Commission is convening by Google Meet, as posted on the town's website, identifying how the public may join. This meeting will not feature public comment. Please wait until I open the item for comment and press *6 to unmute your device. Finally, each vote taken in this meeting will be conducted by a roll call vote. I would like to thank Mark Serra and the Shrewsbury Media Connection for their video support. Okay, let's open the meeting with review and consider approval of the bill schedules and warrants. Does anyone have any comments? Tony?
No, I do not.
Maria?
No, I don't.
Matt?
Nope.
Myself, I have no comments. Motion to accept the bill schedules and warrants?
So move.
Tony, second?
Second.
Matt, thank you. And we'll have a vote. Tony?
Yes.
Matt, Maria?
Yes.
Yes.
Matt? Matt, was that yes?
Yes.
And myself, yes, except as to Myrick O'Connell. And then I have signed these, and I'll try to deliver them to the SELCO offices in lieu of all of our signatures. Next matter is to review and consider approval of the meeting minutes dated December 14th, 2021. Any comments, Tony?
Yes. Just the typo on page 5. It says update electric and cable capital budget development. Budget development, I guess.
And what's the change you want there, Tony?
Just it says budge instead of budget. That's all.
Oh, but okay.
You know.
You read it.
I read it.
Mm-hmm. All right. Any comments, Maria?
On the next page, it says right above 6, review general manager's highlights. That last line, it says Mr. Holland added that the system, Mr. Zacco, will work better. I think we're missing a word or two. Is it the system Mr. Zacco is suggesting, or?
Chris seems to be in agreement. You plugged in a word there that makes sense to you, Chris? Okay. Matt, any comments?
Nope.
I have no comments with the changes so noted. A motion to approve or accept the minutes of December 14th, 2021 as presented.
So moved.
Second.
Tony, second Matt, thank you. Roll call vote. Tony,
Yes.
Maria,
Yes.
Matt,
Yes.
and myself, yes. Thank you. The next matter before us is to review and consider approval of the 2022 cable rate adjustment. Is that you, Chris?
Sure. If I may, with your permission, pass the baton to Jackie for discussion on that.
Okay, Jackie.
Hi, folks. So we find ourselves here again to discuss the cable rate increase. As in previous years, programming costs are really what's behind this this rise in costs for both SELCO and our customers. Primarily, retransmission consent and sports fees continue to push costs upwards, as well as 9 conglomerates owning 95% of the programming. We did have a few different renewals this year, some in-house and some through NCTC. And the end result is basically no increase at basic, $4 increase at expanded, no increase at digital or HD, 25 cents increase on the franchise fee. And then that $4 translates as well into TiVo, commercial expanded, and commercial TiVo. The bulk rates go up significantly based on the recalculations that we did. With expanded basic at the residential cost being $90, the new bulk rate for expanded basic is $50 per room, or $54 per room. We're continuing to see subscriber losses from cord cutting, and our rates do compare favorably to other cable operators, but we continue to struggle against the virtual MVPDs or cable operators, streaming providers. So in looking at the overall picture, I think that we're well positioned in the cable industry, but we're going to continue to struggle with cord cutting. We definitely need to address the senior discount with our next franchise. And I think some of our strategy going forward with the launch of Minerva will provide features that consumers are looking for. So I think it's probably easier to turn it over for questions. If you folks have any, it was pretty extensive memo.
Okay, questions. Tony?
No, I don't have any.
Maria?
No, I don't. Thank you.
Matt?
Nope. Memo is pretty good. Thanks, Jackie.
Myself, I thought the memo was very thorough as well, and kind of stuck with the price increases. I don't know if anything else you want to mention, Chris or Jackie, about the process and the outlook relative to our cable license and the renewal of our cable license, or if you want to hold that for another time. But that's the only thing I would have in mind is, this is this isn't going to change, and the cord cutting is not going to change. I think we have to, with the town, reflect on when the next license renewal comes up. What's the appropriate term for the license? What's the appropriate scope of that license?
Yeah, totally agree, Mike. From that perspective, we're already having these conversations to some extent internally, just, really broad picture. Geez, does a 10-year license really make sense going forward? Or
Right.
What does that strategy look like? I think we know we need to address the senior discount situation.
Right.
But there are other provisions in the agreement right now that we probably need to revisit, and maybe some safety net for our own financial stability going forward, things we might want to add in there. I think Chris and myself and perhaps Jim and Joelle probably want to start fleshing out a calendar for this plan that we would need to put together going towards the end of the year. I think meeting on this and starting the strategy early makes a lot of sense. At what point we bring it to the commission, not really sure yet. We are consulting with a couple of folks who are well-versed and experienced in the cable industry, working with Smart Source Consulting. They're doing some financial analysis. And I think they have some perspective that they can bring to the table for the franchise. That would be helpful.
that was clearly my concern, which was, knowing that the license comes right up on you, and time moves so fast, that we need to be really, you guys, sounds like you are really on top of, well, what changes do we need to make relative to the license, or would we suggest we want to make relative to the license? And, last process, it was fairly easy. We knew the cord cutting was going on, but it was a fairly easy process in that, it was almost a duplication of the prior license. This time around, I'm not sure it'd be exactly the same. So it'd be interesting to get your thoughts, in a way sooner rather than later, so we can be prepared and present that to the town.
Yeah, definitely. And I've already pinged our attorney who usually assists with this, so he knows it's up this year, and he will be able and ready to assist us with drafting the document as well.
Okay.
Could I, Mike, if I may, could I ask
Yeah.
sort of a big picture question that sort of ties to this? Still learning, certainly, acronyms and lingo and all of that. And the thing that we're transitioning to, eventually, the app-based situation, does that long term, does that change? Like, I'm still trying to get my head around what it actually means, but when we're talking about like commercial TiVo, things like that, do elements of that go away, and what is that going to ultimately do to the financial situation that we're discussing here?
So I can talk about it practically. Maybe Chris wants to weigh in on this as well from the financial perspective. But Minerva is basically an IPTV delivery mechanism, and it's going to be split between bring your own device, where it'll ride as an app on something like a Fire TV Stick or a Roku, or we can provide an Android set-top box, which is more of your traditional TV viewing experience. But the underpinning to the Minerva platform is still our programming contracts. It doesn't all of a sudden relieve us of these costs that we experience from the programmers to provide their linear content. It does provide some features that better position us against the virtual MVPDs, which would be the multi-video programming distributor, MVPD. There we go. And they have been able to come out of the gate with much lower rates. We're talking about like Sling TV and YouTube TV, Philo. Some of them are making decisions to have skinnier packages where they don't carry Turner, for example, none of those 12, 15 channels, or the regional sports networks like Nesson or NBC Sports Boston, or any of the local broadcasters. As a cable operator, we're carrying that full complement of programming. So some people are going to want to come to us because we have things they don't. Well, one of the things you're also seeing in that VMVPD world is increasing rates, right? The programmers might have given them a little sweet taste at the beginning there, but now they're starting to ratchet up the costs on their end as well. Then we have competition from the programmers themselves with their over-the-top content, where they're starting to pull popular programming and put it on their plus networks, where subscribers pay directly to them a monthly fee for that extra content. So between that, the OTT content like Hulu and Netflix and Amazon Prime, it's eroding our customer base and makes it hard to compete in that environment. But Minerva is a good platform for us. It's the next generation. We're going to rip and replace all of our existing boxes. But it doesn't change sort of that dynamic in the back end, if that makes sense to you.
Yeah. Will we see a couple weeks ago or last week, I can't remember what it was, we did a tour. I saw the, again, terminology escaping me. Thank you. The head end. Thank you, Chris. And there was like the servers, right, for each of the main, subscriptions or whatever. That goes away with this because it's now internet based, right? Maybe some minor capital costs, but then what about like operational costs of, going up and setting up boxes and all of that? Will that yield any significant sort of efficiencies?
So a lot of the equipment that's at the head end does go away because we're going to basically go to a head end in the cloud for the most part. However, some channels will still originate from here and be streamed up there, like the SPAC channels and potentially some ad insertion channels. We'll have to see how that plays out. From an operational perspective, if people are using the bring your own device model, it's really throw your Fire TV Stick in, install the app. No service collar install required. However, if we're already at somebody's home doing a modem install because they're a new customer and signing up for internet, we'll probably throw that in for them just to make it easy. On the Android set-top box side, it's a little more complicated, particularly if a customer doesn't have internet. Because this is an IP product and it does sort of, it's not really over the top, but because it's app-based, it does require an internet connection. So we have a workaround for customers that do not subscribe to internet, but if that one's a little bit more complicated, that requires heavier lifting than your traditional cable TV install. But I think those are going to be few and far between. Maybe Joelle or Chris can weigh in.
I guess there are two things that I would add. The first one being with respect to equipment and boxes. This is one of the aspects that we're having the financial consultant look at, where we actually, maybe surprising or not, but we do receive a fairly significant income from box rental fees. And so as folks migrate to their own, Fire TV sticks or other devices, that's an element that needs to be incorporated as those fees get reduced. But in theory, those fees are intended to serve a purpose, which is cycle through box fees. So that's just one component. And the other one, and I'm sorry if I missed this if you mentioned it, but in the the evolution of how different entities fund each other, the other big factor is how do we play into sustaining SMC. So if we opt, as our TV revenues decline, so does SMC's. And so as that migrates to zero, or say, just in that theoretical circumstance where TV goes away altogether, SMC's funding mechanism goes away. So we're looking to what's the next evolution of funding for programming like SMC. So that it's another complication to that franchise arrangement and how these types of services get delivered in today's model.
Thanks.
Any other questions? Okay, is there a motion to approve the 2022 cable rate adjustment?
Yes, I move we approve the cable rate adjustment as
Do you hear a
stated.
second?
Second.
Thank you, Tony. Thank you, Matt. Roll call. Anthony, Tony,
Yes, yes.
Maria,
Yes.
Matt,
Yes.
and myself, yes. Okay, motion carries. Next matter is to review and consider for approval the electric and cable operating and capital budgets. Are we going electric first or cable first?
I was going to suggest we go cable first.
Cable first. All right. Set. Jim,
Well, I'll
you start off.
start off and hand the baton.
All right.
So first, just because I'll spend just a brief moment on it, but I do think it's worthwhile. I did want to express gratitude to the group for the effort that Jim and his team and our team put forth to produce the budget. As this is the first budget, just as a noteworthy point, this is the first budget that has not been prepared by our prior finance director for the first time in 2 decades. So it was an interesting exercise to go through, decipher, perhaps, maybe it might be a better word, but look through some of his methodologies for analytics and Excel spreadsheets. So, a little bit of kudos to Jim for coming on board late April and within a short amount of time, going through 2 significant budgets and putting forth an analysis of different accounting practices and presenting to the documents you have before you today. The other noteworthy point is just in that vein, it's not only, a lot of our peers, just to highlight, I think the talent that we have here. Many of our peers are electric only. Most MLPs in Massachusetts are electric only that produce budgets that are smaller than ours just for electric. And so Not only that, our team produces 2 budgets that are often larger than most MLPs in Massachusetts. So there are 2 budgets that we produce in a time frame, and many of those budgets have not been presented yet. So again, I just wanted to take a moment in this more public forum to express some praise for the team we have here. And so with that, I will turn it over to Jim.
Thank you, and thank you, Chris, for those kind words. As we get started here, I just want to just let everybody know one of the ideas I originally had was to present. It was one budget binder, and the reason you got 2 was just more of a timing thing. But my original idea was that we'd have one binder. There would be a company overview with both budgets in it, and then you'd have an overview for each department. And basically that was to represent what's kind of our strategic plan, if you will, for the up and coming year, and just kind of present some of the content that, in projects that we work on outside of the direct business areas that affect the entire company. Based on timing, we just wanted to try to get stuff out. So that's why we ended up getting it, in 2 different binders. But starting now, we will start going into the 2022 budget, starting with the cable budget. If anybody has questions throughout, please feel free to ask. As well, at the end of each budget, I'll have a little time for questions. There may be some answers that we have to look into or get back to, and we will write those down and get back to you guys, with the answers to anything, just because this is, somewhat complex. So if we're trying to dive into something, we may not have the answer right away. And now let's look into the cable budget. We're going to go through first the operating revenue, then the operating expenses, the net income. We'll look at capital additions and capital retirement and projected cash flow. So taking a look at the operating revenue for cable, we are predicting $21 million. This is about a 1% decline over 21 numbers. Taking a look at our operating expenses, they are currently projected at around $16 million. And this is about a 0.5% decline over prior years. Some of the expenses in here, it might be expected that they would go down because we have a fiber project, so we have more capital, but we actually still have to maintain the current infrastructure so that, customers that are still, they're not on fiber yet, we still have a working product for them. Taking a look at net income, we're expecting about $4.7 million in net income. This is about a 3.6% decrease over 2021 revenue and net income, but that's basically in line with our 5-year average, as you can see here, and is a good outcome. Now, if we jump down, this takes a look at some of our capital additions. This year, we're expecting about 1.7 million in capital additions. This number will most likely be higher at the end of the year. With the fiber to the premises project, it's a 3-year project, and we are capitalizing what is in use at the end of each year. In order to predict that at this point is kind of difficult because there's more of the infrastructure gets built out than is actually in use, and we're actively working on figuring out the best mechanisms to say this is what's currently in use, and this is what is still work in progress. So I do expect this number to increase based on whatever work is completed this year, and some of what adds to this challenge is just being able to get subcontractor help during the pandemic. So with all those unknown factors, it was too difficult at this point in time to kind of give what that estimate would be. Jumping down to retirements, we're expecting right now about 280K of retirements. This number as well may increase. Right now, these estimates are based on the current capital additions that we see. In this year, we're going to be working or really diving into our fixed asset schedule and trying to provide more detail to it to make sure we have the most efficient processes for retiring items that actually are removed out of the field, because we do have different types of assets where certain assets like conduit, what's a unit of conduit? You can't retire it, where other assets like, poles, networking gear, and all that stuff can be. So looking through that, this number may change toward the end of the year based on those factors.
Jim, is that thought of as the cost of retiring those assets?
It's twofold. There is that element in it, and it's also any remaining costs of those assets on the books will be expensed at that time, given that they are fully pulled out of operation.
Got you.
Now, taking a look at our projected cash flow, I kind of condensed down the statement just so we could, fit it on a slide. But with when I was meeting with Chris, we were taking a look at cash flow stuff, and this year we kind of reduced it just to remove some of the additional information that kind of became noise in kind of, the idea was to help show the actual difference in change of hands for why cash, what our cash situation is going to be. When we take a look, our general fund, we're looking at a positive cash flow of 1.1 million. Over here, you can see, the totals for the different types of expenditures that we'll have over the year, and we're expecting the year to end around 7 million in cash. From a bond cash fund, we're expecting to spend about $7.4 million for the FTTP fiber to the premises project. This money, you can see, is represented down here, and will bring our bond balance down to 3.4 million. This would probably put us, I want to say, at, I think we would be, a total bond project at that point is probably between, or not bonded project, but total project cost at that point will probably be around 12 or so million of spend. And we did, for this project, both have money in depreciation and in bond. Taking a look at our depreciation numbers, they should increase about 2.4 million, and we should end the year with about 23 million. Looking at our overall projected cash flow, we should be, total funds about 43 million. With that said, any questions?
I have a question,
Yes.
if I may. The beginning of the year, it looked like we had a starting balance in the bond fund of 10 million. Was there sort of a concerted, were we looking forward, looking at the payments and decision made last budget cycle to sort of front load that to carry us through? Yeah, I see heads nodding. I'm assuming that was the case, but was just curious. And when you said $12 million, Jim, is that remaining or is that total?
That is total spend right now. I believe we
Okay.
have about 1.6 million of spend that was pre-bond spend that is part of the project that'll be that is, I believe, being capitalized in 2021. And then we have about I think in total about 5 million or so spend out of the bond. Yes, because the bond was about 15 million, so there was about 5 million of bond spend.
Okay.
And perhaps I'll just add a quick high-level statistic. So we are, from the ideal world schedule projection, we're a few months behind, but phase one is basically wrapping up as we speak. I saw it's not quite out, but for the annual report, Jackie was putting together a nice map showing phase 1, 2, and 3 areas, but phase 1 is wrapping up. 2022 is a major launch into phase 2. So in terms of the $30 million budget projection being 12, thinking of it, it's not quite this linear, but 10, 10, and 10. So we're wrapping up phase 1 with that about 10 million figure. We launch into phase 2, which is I believe the biggest phase. So that'll be that bulk of the 2022 spend.
Got it. Thank you.
Just for questions, just make sure everybody had chance to ask questions. Tony, do you have any questions?
I do not, but I just like to make a comment that it's a nice, clear, concise budget, and it's easy to read. Thank you very much.
Maria, do you have any thoughts or questions?
I do have some questions, maybe concerns. There was discussion in the material about how the costs have gone up, and we're expecting it to go up, and we're kind of like, and if material becomes available, we're buying it as we see it. And if we have another 2 years left on the project, how do we see that impacting the budget on the fiber project?
So we do have a lot of materials already in reserve for the fiber project that were bought previously. When I was first hired here, Joelle actually took me, into a little, tour of the fiber warehouse and stuff. And at that time, we were speaking about how lead times were about a year out on some of those supplies. So we were actively ordering stuff, and we have been actively ordering and storing stuff as of right now. I don't predict that stuff, it should go crazy, but anything could happen from we have multiple raw material, we have multiple industries fighting for the same raw materials out there. So given that kind of thing, there could always be anything, but I'm comfortable enough to say that right now, with kind of what we have in stock, how we're doing our purchasing, that what we're projecting should be fairly accurate. A lot of it will also depend on resources and stuff of subcontractors, and if any type of costs go up from that perspective. As we see those things increase and whatnot, we're going to have to make strategic plans at those times, and we will, start to present stuff to the board explaining, hey, this is what we're seeing. This is why, this is the impact it's having.
Okay, thank you.
And I would add, though, I think, at least for me, concern might be too strong a word, but I do share the discomfort with the unpredictability of the materials markets moving forward, not just because of the pandemic shortages, but also with everyone launching into fiber and the whole work from home push. You're still seeing a more constrained market. And again, I'm not an economist, but those supply and demand measures where demand is high and supply remains unchanged, those dynamics were not, I'm going to go out on a limb and say this, were not forecasted, I'm sure, when the project was developed. It just wasn't a thing. I mean, who would forecast, dealerships charging $50,000 over MSRP for a new vehicle today? And so it's like, is there advantages to being a few months behind to let them pan out? I'm not entirely sure, but we'll know as we try and close our remaining bill of materials for phase 2 and issue bids. We'll see what the bid market presents, and we'll have a better idea for what impacts that might have. In different industries, we're maybe this is a segue into the next one in a minute, but we see, at least, and please correct me if you think differently, but I feel like we've seen, depending on the material as well, conduit, bridges, cable, and electric. But for instance, the example we've used, transformers are electric only. Those have seen a different impact than perhaps fiber would, or some of the cable boxes and remotes. Those are same availability as before. But so we'll see with our next round of bids in today's procurement market to better predict that.
Maria, you all set? Assume you are. Matt, any further questions?
I have a lot, but in the interest of time, I might request to Jim, maybe we find, I'd love to just kind of dig a little deeper for my own edification, maybe set something up down the road.
100% works. And just one thing I noticed other MLPs do is that they kind of have a double touch of the budget, where they present the budget 1 month and then they give I think it's like a 2-week period for commissioners and boards to submit questions, and then they take the next 2 weeks to kind of prepare the answers, and then they present that at the following budget, and then the budget usually gets approved during that meeting. So that is something that if we find would be more useful, because I know these have a lot of content. I know especially this year it was delivered very quick to the meeting, so maybe people didn't get to dig into some stuff. I'm more than willing to try something like that as well. Or if anybody has any questions and wants to set up a meeting, more than willing to meet with people and walk through what's going on.
Okay, thank you. I have no further questions. Jim opened up the possibility of not approving the budget and asking further questions. Like to hear thoughts on that. Tony, is that something you're interested in, or you rather just approve the cable budget now?
No, I'd rather approve it now. I don't have any questions on it.
Maria?
Yeah, I'm all set with the numbers as they're presented.
Okay. Matt? Are you comfortable enough approving the budget now, and then despite the fact that you still have some questions, or do you want to hold off?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm comfortable enough with having read enough budgets to get it, but at the same time, just knowing some of the nuances for SELCO behind the numbers will long term be helpful. But I think at this moment I'm okay.
Okay, I'm all set as well. All right, motion to approve the 2022 cable budget as presented. Roll call vote. Tony?
So moved.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Motion and a second.
Second.
Okay, thank you. Roll call. Tony?
Yes.
Maria?
Yes.
Matt?
Yes.
And myself, yes. All right, next item on the agenda is the electric capital budget, to review and consider 2022 electric operating capital budget. You starting with Chris or Jim?
I'll be starting. So now we jump over to the electric budget side, and just to kind of what we'll go over for this one, we're going to start with operating revenue. We'll talk about energy sales. We'll go into operating expenses. We'll talk about net income, capital additions and retirements, and then walk through the projected cash flow, very similar to the cable budget. Taking a look at operating revenue, we are expecting about 31 million from operating revenue this year. This is a 2.6% decline over 2021. And just to let you know, these numbers are estimated, but we did use the most current actuals. So by estimated, it's basically if there's any changes, for year-end financials. So that they're the actual numbers we have today minus any additional review. Taking a look at that, 9 million of our revenue comes from kind of our residential and commercial customers, and about 2 million is expected to come from government. Jumping down to our energy sales are expected to decrease, and this is just due to MWEC's forecast. So basically, MWEC is one of our providers, and they help us project the numbers for usage, and they do it on a 5-year scale. So just looking at their numbers, and we kind of plug them into our tables, we are expecting to see a decrease in 2022. Looking at our operating expenses are expected to increase about 12% in 2022. This is due to a bunch of different factors, but one that I'd like to point out is our purchase power. So purchase power consists of both the line here called purchase power and transmission expense. This purchase power line basically only has pass-through costs from the services that we are procuring through MWEC, where this transmission expense does include some internal costs. The internal costs we use and analyze because we get a transmission credit back for. The internal costs are really not expected to change much this year, but we are looking at a very big increase. I think it's 2.1 million in overall purchase power from prior years. And usually when you have purchase power increasing like this and revenue is either staying stable or decreasing, that's when, you know, it is, you need to look at the possibility of rate increases and go down those avenues.
So, Jim, just
Yes.
picking up on large trends, previous slide, you said a reduction in overall load, but a significant increase in power purchase. Do we have a sense of what's driving that? I mean, because it's the contracts are clearly costing more, right? If the usage is going down, yet there's a big delta in the opposite direction.
Yes. So that's based on the industry. So right now, everybody is feeling this across the board in the electric industry. For what's driving it, my major assumptions, I'm not as connected into those like networks that really go over this type of stuff, but it's pandemic related.
I can add some color to that. And I tried to make a note in the narrative a bit about that, where power supply, you know, usually you get saved where lower sales. Well, we didn't have to buy it, so you don't have that expense. But we've seen significant increases, well, just speaking for purchase power, with our unhedged. So we're forecasting our unhedged portion of our spot market power procurements to go up significantly. And so that's part of that. I'd have to go back and look to see, refresh my memory. But then we have this other portion of, I call it, it's not officially called this, but MWIC hedge. So we have the spot market component, and then we have this component that's not as long-term, where some of our other contracts are 20-year contracts that are on staggered schedules that expire. So the other component is this MWIC hedge, as well as expiring contracts, would then be rebid in today's power markets. And so those components are factored into the forecast. And so these numbers are generated by MWIC's algorithms, taking in those inputs and market forecasts to output the purchase power, the loads, and then subsequent cost.
Yeah. And the things driving those increases on the macro level, is it the same old story of, you know, retiring generation assets, fuel congestion, blah,
Exactly.
blah, blah.
Yep.
Thank you. Great explanation.
I have a quick question. So does any of this have to do with the change in the makeup of where we're deriving the power from as we move towards zero carbon?
That is the key question that we figured would be asked. And the answer to that is no. So none of those decisions are incorporated in that change. This is purely with respect to our current portfolio mix. And one of the things that in fact, I think we have a meeting later today about this, that I've been discussing with MWIC, is to examine more closely entering into longer term contracts and perhaps reduce that MWIC hedge component. So we know to the prior point, if you have these contracts for 20 years, it's good and bad. You know, I've heard arguments on both sides. You know what that cost is for 2 decades, and you do it in staggered contracts, and it's predictable, and you can set the rates. You know, the other extreme example is what we face of folks that live in investor-owned territories, where they reset their rates every 6 months, and you see dramatic price swings based on the markets. And so we're kind of in the middle. And so as we look to replace retiring or excuse me, expiring contracts, that's when the answer to your question could be more specific, such as if we like our MWIC hedge is market power. Market power is largely gas. And so if we're, and try not to cite specific costs, but if we're looking at under 5-cent power for MWIC hedge for just generic grid mix, and then something over 5-cent power for a solar specific, say, contract, that's when you'd see the price differential for that revenue. I'm sorry, that mix decision, the power supply decision.
Could I add on to that question? Few questions laid in here. One is, do we get like an annual report from MWEC on the portfolio? And is that something that's usually shared with the board?
I don't think officially, but certainly we can send it to you, because in there, I think, so the short answer is absolutely. We can send that to you. We in there is our specific contract rates, which we try and maintain confidentially on that for the contract integrity. But certainly we can share that independently outside of the public disclosure.
Great, thank you. And then secondly, you're talking about the sort of the part of the portfolio that's hedged. We have the spot market dynamic. You introduced the longer term 20-year contract. In my mind, I had that already set into sort of the hedge piece, but
Okay.
and then there's sort of PPA, individual one-off PPAs for procurement of solar, whatever. Is that the mix right there? Like, are those the main tiers? And then I guess, where are we today proportionally? Are we like 20% spot market? I think you told me this once before, but I forget.
Sure. Geez, no, great questions. And we could even do that. We could do a summary overview with MWIC. They do that all the time. But to quickly answer that, we do try right now. I think we're slightly over, but for round numbers, we are at that 20-ish% spot market open position, and the rest is hedged. But with that hedge, in my mind, I've broken it down into two components. One, I call it medium-term MWIC hedge, which is still grid mix. It's just not spot market grid mix. So that's maybe a 2-year lock-in of price. And then there's the other component, which is that long-term hedge of hydro, solar, and wind.
I mean, it's not going to get any cheaper. I like the idea of if you could lock in at a lower cost for an extended period of time. I mean, 20 years seems maybe pretty long.
Sure. Yeah.
But I mean, I don't see in the next decade it getting much better, particularly as we move down the road of energy transition where there's an inherent additional cost in any of those resources coming online.
Exactly. And I just throw out 20 years. I mean, we do have some, but I think the primary driver has been keeping that staggered expiration schedule. So we do layer in some 5-year hydro. We've discussed recently. We do have some 20-year solar, and then there's things in between that we can look at.
Hydro's great. Anyway, we could talk about that stuff for a while.
Okay.
Great. Thank you.
So one other point I just want to kind of show from the operational expenses, these 3 categories here of distribution, customers and sales, and administrative in general, those are 3 areas that we have a little more control over the expenses compared to the purchase power and transmission. Now you'll notice this year those numbers are going up as well. And, given the, increase in purchase power, the holding steady of revenue, the question could be why, so Chris and I, we brought this to different managers and stuff. We've looked at these items and we've removed anything that, is clear cut, it doesn't need to be done this year or whatnot. But there are still items that, because of the pandemic, are things that don't fall in the capital project category, but are operational expenses that do have to be done every year. And those are things that if you just forego, it ends up causing, bigger expenses down the line. So that's one reason why these expenses still, are increasing. Another reason is, we've had a major loss in employee turnover in the last couple of years. And that was a lot of institutional knowledge lost. So now you have new employees coming in, but I will let Chris add on to this in a second. You have new employees coming in. There's learning curves. We need, training and development. If those people are not familiar with the industries, we have to provide industry training, as well as we want to start bringing in, consulting in certain areas to make sure we're doing the appropriate things. Because when you lose that institutional knowledge, and you have as custom processes and systems as we currently have set up here, it takes a lot to kind of make sure you're not missing anything, as well as just the overall industry increases across vendors and all those other things. So this is the numbers we feel comfortable are most accurate to project what our end position will be. And Chris to add.
Thank you. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. Just a quick signal. So the other point that was brought to my attention, which I think is really worth passing along, is the 5-year average, the 2021 numbers, or even before that. Those are all actuals. So the 2022 budget numbers are what our best effort at forecasting to even the cable question. What are our materials procurements going to look like? What are our activities going to look like? And we intentionally, I'll freely admit this, intentionally go conservative. And so we add that in, or for perhaps I'll use Jim's position. Like we didn't forecast with the 21 budget the retirement of our finance director. And so, but in that budget is a full year's salary, but for 6 months out of the year, we didn't pay anyone. So that's why you'll see, just that and other things. So the actuals are always going to be the more concise version, in my opinion, than the budgeted figures, where we try and forecast the uncertainties to come. And also, for simplicity, almost like the frictionless plane, if you will, in physics class. Just remove those complexities of employees coming and going and things like that, and just say, okay, if we're fully staffed for the entire year and everyone's working on overhead systems and underground maintenance, this is what the costs would look like.
And so with that, we'll move on to net income. This year, we are predicting with the current revenue and the current operating expenses, a net income of negative $800,000. So when me and Chris first saw this number, it was higher, and that's where we went back and we looked at expenses, we reviewed stuff, and then we really started digging into what is causing this. And as we can see, the main source is really this increase in purchase power that is 2.1 million. And when you look at the decrease in our revenue of about 847K, this is really a net impact on the financials of $3 million. So just taking a deeper discussion into the net income, we started looking at it and saying, okay, if we were to pull out this, where would we be? So, I took a look at just basically an adjusted budget. If everything was equal from last year from, a purchase power perspective for what revenue we'd be getting and what, purchase cost would be, we'd be looking about 2.2 million, in our net income. Then, I just to kind of sanity check stuff, we jumped in and we said, okay, if at any other previous year we had this $3 million impact, how would our end numbers be? And we took a look at those adjustments, and they'd be affected heavily. This is something that because I reached out to different colleagues in the industry that I had previously to ask, like, are you guys seeing the same things? And they are, and they go, they're very much experienced in the rate design and purchase power cost stuff, and they're like, this is normally a sign of rate increase. So we will have to look into it, in 2022, doing a cost of service study and seeing, what type of increase will be needed. And to Chris for more.
So I looked ahead to what the other slides are. So before we switch into the capital component, which is more of the cash flow, a couple of points I wanted to make here with respect to the cost of service study and rate design. So one of the things, and again, and I apologize for the short timeline on receiving the budget. So in the narrative, I tried to add a couple of paragraphs to highlight the differences between power supply and operating expenses with respect to net incomes and surplus and that type of number. So one thing we did launch at the end of last year through MWIC, which is included in our membership, is the financial analysis, which is conveniently to be the preliminary numbers delivered on the 28th, so 3 days from now. So we'll have some more insights. But the key is, I look back, we did a GTA adjustment last fall. So if you look back at the GTA memo, what it had shown was the prior 6 months. So we do the GTA in April and October of every year. So every 6 months we take a look at reconciling our power supply expenses. So what those numbers had showed in round numbers, based on my memory, is from the April timeframe to September, we had a $2.3 million surplus on power supply. And then from October through March, we were predicting a $1.3 million deficit. And so because power supply is revenue neutral, we are still giving a credit back because we over collected substantially in that prior year, where this budget doesn't incorporate that. So in this budget reflects not only the power supply increased deficit, but also the give back to reconcile the over collection from the prior years. So that's one component. So for instance, if you look at, like Jim's slide showed, the net income of roughly 3 million on average, 5-year average, that could, and I don't know this is part of some of the research we're doing, that could have been fully power supply, so we have to give it back. And so that's part of that GTA, like that April through September timeframe of a 2.3 million over collection eats into that significantly. So this rate study is looking at our distribution rates collecting for those expenses that go up. So with a $12 million, a 12 million kilowatt hour reduction in sales, that directly translates to lower distribution revenue recovery, which, unlike power supply, doesn't have a subsequent reduction in cost. So we're taking a closer look at that rate with respect to customer charge, distribution charge, demand charge, that all recover operating expenses that do allow us to supplement the surplus without independent of power supply. So that's where we'll have more results 3 days from now or so. But and sorry, the last, I almost forgot one other point was with the GTA adjustment in March, again showing that $800,000 deficit, again with the primary driver being power supply. That number, that's a number if we do nothing. But if we make the adjustments to react to the power supply, reevaluate the GTA, and at the same time we'll take a look at our operational recovery mechanism, we'll see where that lands, and we'll report on on all those figures.
Chris, can I just ask a quick question relative to net income surplus at the end of 1 year when facing a potential need due to the purchase increase costs of a, looking at a rate increase? Can that surplus, the credit back to the customer, be factored into balancing out the net, or does it have to be kept like a sort of a separate, almost like accounting exercise?
Exactly. So, and I could send that to you. Certainly, I didn't think to do so, but in the GTA memo, and I think this is what you're asking, please tell me if it's not, but in the GTA memo, that true up you'll see specifically pulls the generation and transmission line items from the bills. And so that we reconcile separately.
Okay.
And that's the amount we credit back against power supply expenses. And so to your point, there should be a second component, if you will, where we analyze the operational recovery costs with respect to our operational expenses. And I did see that in 2019, the consultant that was hired did that analysis in 2019. And again, this is off memory, but in 2019, it showed our operational rates were about 8 million in revenue at that load level, and our expenses at the time in 2019 were about 7. So it was $1 million surplus for operations in 2019. And so, and I can't remember if I put it in the narrative, but just that quickly, since that time, our depreciation expense, which is funded by that mechanism, which is a good thing, reflection of capital investment in the system, went up $500,000. So that $1 million surplus is already cut in half. And then on top of that, you add in 12 million in lower kilowatt hour sales. That $1 million margin continues to erode a bit. And then not to mention just, the CPI component, if you will, with material, labor, all of those costs going up. That's that $1 million that is probably, and again, I don't have the numbers, but arguably zero now, indicating that we need to have that rate increase to keep pace with the changing costs with society.
Great, thanks.
I had a question. Didn't we have a rate stabilization fund that was supposed to kind of mitigate some of this?
So yes, another good question. We do, you'll see that, I think, on one of Jim's slides coming up with the cash flow. We have a rate stabilization fund separate from the GTA. And so we could, again, this could certainly be part of that GTA discussion, depending on what the GTA results would be. Say, for instance, this is how I would look at that fund, subject to any other input, certainly, is the GTA. So say we do the analysis and it says we should be charging people another, I'm going to purely made up numbers, 10 cents. And whoa, 10 cents is a huge figure. We could lower that using that $1.5 million of rate stabilization to lower the impact, and then over a longer period of time replenish that fund, spreading that out over time. The best example was, and I'm sorry I forget the year, but that year where there were serious gas constraints and prices skyrocketed, and utilities are charged 22% rate increases. We were able to leverage. It was 9%, which is still not great, but with respect to the industry, it's less than half. And so we leveraged that through rate stabilization and some of those other hedge strategies where we didn't have as much open position. But that's how I would see use of that rate stabilization fund.
Good, thank you.
Jim, do you want to carry on? Or are you all set?
Sorry about that. I was muted. And I have so many screens on to get back to the main screen to
Yes.
unmute was a challenge.
I've been there.
But with no more questions, I was saying we'll jump over to the capital additions area. In 2022, we're looking at 6.3 million in capital additions. You can see over here, these are some of the more notable projects and purchases that we will be doing on the electric side during this year. And, you know, when we take it, we'll jump to the next slide, which goes into a discussion. But when we take a look at capital spend compared to previous years, you can see it's a major increase over 2021 to the tune of, you know, 280%. And it kind of jumps out at you. It's what happened. So we kind of jumped in to take a look, and we're noticing what's basically a pandemic impact. It's basically a delay in capital spend. So for the last 2 years, we've been budgeting about $3.5 and $3.8 million respectively, but we haven't even been coming close to those numbers. So I jumped in and I took a look at, you know, what are carry forward numbers from previous years, and it was about $2.6 million of carry forward. And some of the items that were budgeted in 2020, we didn't re-budget for in 2021 because we knew we weren't going to get to do them because we knew about the pandemic, but they still need to be done. So they're budgeted in 2022. So if we take a look at the adjusted impact from the pandemic, removing that 2.6, we're at about 3.6 million. That is more on pace with, you know, what we should be investing in the system on a year-to-year basis. When we jump over to capital retirements, right now we're looking at about 35K. I do expect this number to go up. Like I said prior, we're working on really kind of understanding our fixed asset schedule and kind of what items are still on the books. And as I can get more detail, I'll understand what can be removed better. Jumping down to the projected cash flow, we're taking a look at the general fund first, and we see it is a negative cash flow of about 6.3 million. When we jump down to the depreciation fund, we're noticing it is an increase of about 2.4 million. Looking at the PCA fund, which this is what Tony was just referring to, this is that rate stabilization fund that is held by MWEC. We're, you know, still staying stable at 1.5. And this is just current projections. Once we go through an analysis, it could be decided that we do use some of this. And then we have our construction fund, which is about 1.8 million. Taking a look at total funds, we're at about 19. So now if we jump into, just because, you know, understanding this 6.3 million, what is that made up of? Well, it's a couple different factors. We have increased capital spend in 2022. When we take a look at, you know, we have decreasing operational revenue, which we talked about. We have increase in purchase power, which we talked about. And the last one is transferring money to the depreciation fund. This is one thing we're currently looking into. And I took the conservative approach on this budget for both what we're estimating for 2021 and for 2022. You know, we want to understand more what is the true replacement cost of what should be in this depreciation fund balance. So as you can see over the years, it's been lower, and the last two we're kind of have an increase. I just want to make sure before we, you know, either net funds that are going in or we're taking funds that are going out, that we kind of understand what the general idea is earmarked for this funds, and that we don't put ourselves in a situation where we don't have enough funds to replace major items. One of the things we're kind of targeting as a company is to build out to the point where we have a 3 and 5 year capital plan. We know what's coming, and we can kind of really have a good understanding of those numbers. So just currently, just to kind of, you know, make sure we're not doing anything that could cause us, you know, harm in the future, I went conservative with this approach. Now, if we, if we take a look here, you can see our overall fund balance is still at 19, which is, increased from 2019. And you can kind of see an inflated balance amount because of reduced spend during 2020 and 2021. And with that, any questions that we haven't asked yet for the electrical budget? And Chris, I think, has one comment he'd like to make. We'll jump back to that.
Yes, thank you. So the other thought, just with respect to the capital investment versus depreciation expense relationship, one of the things that I have been thinking about recently is also, with the pandemic impacts that Jim included on his slide, and just I guess lower capital related activity. Once we try, this is first important point is the good thing is, capital projects that are not undertaken just stay there. Same as if you have a house and you're like, this year I'll replace the roof, and you don't. Well, provided you didn't spend it on something else, that roof replacement money is still in your bank account somewhere. So that's the good news here. The second piece, though, as it pertains to my prior comment with respect to our operating revenue components, is that once we start catching up, if you will, and making greater capital investments, that increases depreciation expense, which then comes out of that operating rate making mechanisms, which further emphasizes the need to take a closer look on a more regular basis to make sure our non-power supply revenue components are keeping pace with our operating activities. So we're incorporating that as part of this capital activity.
Okay, open up to more formal questions. Tony Trippi, any questions?
No, I don't have any. Thank you.
Okay, Maria, any further questions?
I do. I have a couple. So getting back to like the line items where we do have some control over, specifically admin, there was discussion about like changing over the software, like the accounting software, and seems like it's like a major overhaul. Is an outside consultant being brought in, and there was no discussion on what that cost is for the budget.
When you say an outside consultant to help implement the software, or so basically the company that we are going with, they provide those services on their own. So it's a complete package from an implementation perspective, where they will be working with us to implement their software at each level, and they bring in those assets for each specific module that comes in. So in 2022, we're looking at the financial module and the MDMS module, and we will have experts from that company coming in to help implement those. And that is also going to be an additional process or assistance to what I look at for my team, to be able to review all of our processes in 2022 and streamline them, hopefully for the end of the year, and get them into, a system that is more designed for utilities and has those type of controls. So there won't be additional consultants per se on this is how it should be brought in from the financial aspect, but we may have to have some costs for consultants if we need something, from a and this, I don't even know if it'd be as much consultants, but outside services fees, if we had to bring in experts to help, transition or do any data migration that we couldn't do internally. We did predict a little bit of money for that, but we believe that because of the in-house expertise we have with certain staff, that we should be able to do a lot of that internally.
So Jim, the cost for the new system is what? And that cost, is there an additional cost for their services to come in and implement it?
Yes, there are implementation costs. We will not see the effect of most of these costs until 2023, because and we haven't officially met with, deadlines, but none of the billing will come in until everything is implemented. I believe the rough implementation costs are about $500,000. And going forward, the support fees are somewhat of a wash with systems like Munis, our billing systems, some of the current, electric and cable systems. But then there's certain systems that we would have to go out and bring online. So, like for example, to get usage of your AMI meters, you need an MDMS system. That's the system that gathers all of that meter data, analyzes it. It's going to be used for future billing reporting. Once you get, customer loads, you can project that stuff on websites. That system's something we'd have to go with a third party. We'd have to integrate, and then we'd have to integrate currently with Harris. So some of those costs end up becoming future cost wash. And to Chris to add.
So, and I think just to try and add some more detail to that. So I think to summarize, and this is the way I look at it, perhaps in a higher level of detail or lower level of detail than Jim. But right now we have 3 enterprise systems in GLDS, Harris, and Munis. And then on top of that, we have Invoice Cloud and Cathedral for billing. And then we don't have a meter data management system. We don't have an outage management system. And we don't have
a customer portal that
customer
provides
portal. Thank you. That's
usage and data, and it's just payments.
So what we did was, in order to use AMI, you need the MDM. A utility of today should have an OMS, and we were looking at, so then you have all these independent entities all pointing at each other and trying to communicate. And our IT folks, when I first got here, literally, I could show you the picture. It looks like a spider web on Halloween on how all these things try and communicate with one another. And so over time, Jim's number cites the entire implementation of all modules, but it's a system that gradually, as you implement, you pay as you go. And so we implement the MDM, we pay, we implement OMS, and then once everything integrates and talks to one another, you start to add those and transition away from all these independent systems that don't coordinate with one another. And so that analysis Jim did do, and he can certainly share that. That shows all those services fees. So then you keep adding all these companies, all those service fees, the ongoing software maintenance fees all tally up. And so over time, as things go implemented and then replaced, those numbers are arguably similar.
And from one of the things we were seeing, both it appears that both our payment collection and our billing services, those costs will go down going forward. NISC uses First Data, which is one of the largest credit card companies in the world. I believe they are the largest. They do trillions of dollars of transactions, compared to Invoice Cloud using Chase Payment Tech, which does billions. You end up getting a better return on your purchases. So we are going to see different things like that going forward, plus the end-all be-all integration of being able to have a billing system, payment solution, and all of that connected to a financial software is going to pull us out of this web of Excel that we currently have today.
I don't think there was any argument on the change being necessary. I was just looking for what was a dollar impact.
Yeah, this year, not much. It'll be going forward, and that's kind of a good thing, because as we transition systems, it hopefully will be we'll end certain systems one year and start new systems the next, and have that wash.
Okay. And the only other thing that I'm pretty concerned about, and I was kind of concerned with it last year after the audit, was with all the changes in employees, whether they're retiring or bringing on new ones, more so the retiring people, is what that's going to do to the retirement funding, because last year there was no amount, and I know this goes through a third party and in the chain and it gets documented during the audit, but I'm a little concerned on what that impact is going to have on the bottom line after we see audited financial statements.
It's a great point.
I will take a look into that.
Okay, thank you.
Matt, do you have any further questions?
Yes, but we'll move on. I'm good. Thank you.
Okay, I have no other questions. We have a motion to approve and accept the 2022 cable and operations budget.
I move we accept the budget as stated.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, all in favor? Anthony, Tony, Trippy.
Yes.
Like they read Anthony, I can't help it. I read him and I say, wait, I never called you Anthony.
I thought you were saying Anthony.
Anthony, who's he? That's what your mom would call you, right?
That's right.
Maria Lemieux,
Yes.
Matt Beaton,
Yes.
and myself, yes. All right, that's motion approved. Chris, some quick highlights.
Sure. Let's see here. As I try and do, I try and pull some relevant items. I did, if you noticed, because I do notice the attention to detail. I recopied this the first legislative bit is from last month as well, just because it pertained to budget. So I just wanted to continue to emphasize that this is a unique and interesting industry challenge we face related to procurement. Cybersecurity, that's another big one. I know we didn't specifically address this, and certainly more than happy to talk to this point at any time. We are upping some of our insurance policies. We're reviewing it, and so we work with PERMA for advisory services and implementation of insurance. That is most certainly on our radar, just to say we're thinking about it, and we're incorporating, up-to-date cyber threat insurance to make sure we're covered for some of these disasters that you might see on the news. So I just wanted to add a little bit of the cybersecurity component to that. We did have a couple again, add a little credit. We were impacted by the Log4j vulnerability, if anyone ever saw that. But we were able to quickly isolate that from the few systems that we had with that threat. But again, it's just as things get more and more connected, it's a bigger piece of our pie from an attention standpoint. And then just a couple other, in the interest of time, I won't go through too many, but just some of things that I thought might be interesting from a policymaking standpoint. Some of the activities in Greenfield from their perspective, the carbon reduction goals in Maine, just to show some of the thoughts with respect to electrification and some of the attention that we're doing with, again, with more time and certainly more discussion whenever you'd like to have it. But just with respect to what we're doing on our programming content and our efforts to implement these programs locally in Shrewsbury. But it just shows, from an industry perspective, we're in line with the direction of the industry as a whole. Prices up day ahead, real-time markets, just related to the budget stuff. And one thing, and I don't have a good answer to this, I'll admit, but one of the things I had to include here is the decarbonization goals could triple reliance on electricity grid. And so I just find it fascinating. And again, people far smarter than I are making the algorithms on these forecasting platforms. But to predict lower kilowatt hour sales at the same time as we're talking about ramping up strategic electrification and adoption of heat pumps is fascinating to me. And then the reliance on the electric grid going up. So they seem counterintuitive, So, that just takes up a lot of my thought time about what's going on. But I just thought you might find that interesting. And then just the project list. I don't think there's anything of particular note outside of the normal good work that our folks are doing. The sustainability report from our IR folks is noteworthy, so you can see it in there. The commercial EV charger rebate program, again, trying to tie that back to some of the legislative bits in the beginning, just to highlight some of the activities we're trying to engage in support of some of these broader goals. On the broadband side, again, we're making steady progress to the 24/7, 365 help desk support that we did. It was a meeting or 2 meetings ago. Again, just in the interest of continuing to have those service levels available across the board. We covered that with respect to our local help desk folks, but also, being mindful of, people that need support in the off-peak hours, if you will. Again, just some IT statistics. Happy to answer any questions, and then our standard customer reports. So that's the abbreviated version, but I'm more than happy to answer any questions.
Any questions for Chris? Tony?
No, I do not.
Maria?
No questions.
Matt?
No, other than these reports are great, Chris, and the amount of narrative you put in the budget report as well. It's a busy month, and but it's very helpful information. So thank you for pulling it all together for us.
Appreciate that.
And I have no further questions. Sounds like we are ready to adjourn. I hear a motion to adjourn.
I move we adjourn.
A second?
Second?
Okay. All in favor? Tony?
Yes.
Maria?
Yes.
Matt?
Yes.
Myself, yes. Thank you, everybody. Thanks for the meeting.
Thank you. Good day.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.